Hello, this is Eric Siegel. We're turning the tables today on Paul Orselli, and we're going to do a museum fact, but I'm going to be interviewing Paul. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself since Paul usually opens with an introduction about himself and I'm the interviewer. I have been in the museum field for 30 something years, 35 years, and I've done everything from business manager and operations to development. And then the last 20, or for about 15 years, I was the director and chief content officer at the New York Hall of Science. And that's where I really had a chance to interact with Paul. We did some projects together, which were great. I'm sure we'll talk about. And then we, and then I came out here to California. So I was a New Yorker. I came out here to California. I live in Oakland now. I'm broadcasting from sunny Oakland. I was the director of the University of California Berkeley Botanical Garden for a number of years, and then worked for the university doing some consulting about the museums here. And now I am independent. So I have joined the cohort of people who were, there are a bunch of us who've been sitting at this table for a long time, and now we're stepping away from the table and doing projects that that interest us or that people want us to help with. So far so good, and we're delighted to be here. By the way, I have to say, Paul, that seeing your museum fact videos has been a great way to sort of stay in touch with colleagues and learn about people that I didn't know about. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do it, and also I think it's a really smart way during COVID to keep your name and face and out there. So thanks for doing it, and I hope it's been working out well for you.
Yeah, no, it started as a pandemic project because since we couldn't go anywhere and there were no live conferences where we would normally see people again, it was an opportunity to, as you say, stay in touch, but also to share people's ideas. Lots of good ideas and people who I knew well and people I didn't know so well, but here we are.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've been doing, and I'll put a little plug for this, is um, uh, Jenny Sayre Ramberg and I both have been involved with the National Association for Museum Exhibition for a long time. And Jenny Sayre started an informal coffee gathering on Wednesdays at 10 Eastern Standard Time, and I shamelessly stole the idea and started a West Coast version of that. So it's Thursdays at 10 Pacific Time, and it's a super informal gathering. There's a Facebook. If you go into the name National Association for Museum
We
Exhibition.
will put the
Put
references
a
in the
link down
description below, as they say on YouTube.
As they say on YouTube, right? Okay, so yeah, so and I say that because the opportunity to stay in touch and have conversations with colleagues is definitely one of the deprivations that we felt. A lack of opportunity is definitely one of the deprivations we felt over the past year, 18 months. I hope the ice is breaking, but we'll see.
Well, as a former NAME board member, I'm always happy to give a plug to NAME. So
yeah, it's a good group. And by the way, the exhibition magazine, which we can put a link to.
I just got my latest copy.
Oh,
See,
yeah, so it has something. I think I wrote the thing on. I think it's in there. I haven't seen it yet on the Murmuration. In there. So that was a kind of informal exhibition.
Well, and since we're being hype men for NAME, I'll just say that previous issues of the Exhibition Journal, formerly the Exhibitionist Journal, are available for free online. So that's another way that NAME continues to share information and contribute to the field. So
yeah, and for any of you who happen to be students who are just sort of thinking about or learning about the field, I can't think of a more sort of wide lens way to, still quite in depth, to understand what's involved in making exhibitions. Paul's been doing a nuts and bolts kind of article column for quite a long time. And then there's a lot of sort of more theoretical things, and it's just a very broad lens. So go by and check out certainly the free ones, and then if you like it, subscribe. So that's our ad.
This museum FAQ is sponsored by NAME, the National Association for Museum Exhibition.
There you go, man. Yeah, so I was thinking, I'd known about I know about you before I met you, and I've been in the museum field for probably about as long as you have, but I wasn't in exhibitions, and you. It seems like you sort of been in exhibitions since the beginning of your career. So I want to explore that a little bit, so I wonder if you want to just give a kind of bird's eye view of what the arc of your career has been, and I'll ask questions where I think you're making things up.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, actually, my very first museum job, literally just a week after I graduated from the University of Michigan,
And
was
go blue. I'm gonna
Go Blue.
Michigan.
We'll give all the places where the worlds intersect here.
Right.
But my I did my undergraduate degree in anthropology and zoology, my Bachelor of Science. And so my intent always had been to work in a science museum and do exhibits.
Wow.
And of course, my first museum job was for the Detroit Historical Museums.
Right.
It was very much a public facing. I was a living history interpreter. I dressed up as a Civil War soldier. When I went to work, it was 1864 every morning. And so literally
I know you're old, but not quite that.
But that's how we interpreted it. And so, but that was really, I mean, that was an awesome way actually to start what is now 40 years and counting in the museum business, because it was very much a public facing role. And it showed me deliberately another side, and an important side, the education side and public facing side. So really my first jobs were all those kinds of jobs, working at Cranbrook or the Detroit Science, what was then called the Detroit Science Center, as an explainer or as a summer science camp counselor, so it was all like education in front of house and public facing jobs.
That's interesting. That's true of a number of these people who have done some of the best work in the museum field, that they got their start as kind of public interpreters. And so I wanted to talk about something specific. I think the first time I encountered your name, and this may be a legacy that you wish you could shake off, but it was incredibly influential, which is the cheap book publications. And for those of you who don't know, I'll just give you my perspective on what the cheap books are, and then I'll ask you some questions about them. The cheap book, I think there are four. I really count them. I lost track. And they're ways to make it. They're just menus for making exhibits. I mean, you can sit at home with one of these things, take a trip to the hardware store, and you can make an exhibit. Quite a sophisticated set of exhibitions. Some of them are very mechanically and simple. I think that's part of what I've noticed about your career, which we can talk about. You tend to not over elaborate the technology part of it. But so they're incredibly useful for people who are trying to understand how exhibits are made, and also I would say that probably the exhibits from the cheap books have or some versions of them have shown up in more museums than probably any other source. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the cheap book.
Yeah. I'm just laughing because since the cheap books, 4 of them and counting, who knows, that I never thought there would be more than one, but they were published in collaboration with Aztec, the Association of Science Technology Centers. And the reason and I'm happy. The thing I'm only going to half point because right now the Aztec is sort of reconfiguring their website. So I went on it a few months ago and was like, "Where's the cheap books?" So if you're interested in the cheap books, you can contact me, and we're still sort of working out the details. My inclination, this is a news flash, this is really a news flash. My inclination is, if maybe this will be a spur to Aztec, if Aztec sort of does it, we don't sort of work it out, I just want to turn them into the free books, like like a Creative Commons thing there. Right. But really they were very much cut from the same, a similar cloth from the Exploratorium cookbooks and later the snack book. But the idea was, in the case of the cheap books, to gather basic exhibit recipes from museum colleagues all over the world that were meant to be able to be done inexpensively, because even big museums like the New York Hall of Science, or you name it, the Exploratorium, sometimes they have a little place they want to fill in a corner of a new exhibition someplace, or that.
But it's more than that. I mean, I think that these are really germs of ideas, in a lot of ways. So, I would say, I mean, you have a broader experience than I do, but I would say that any average exhibition suite, let's say I'm doing an exhibition about X, you know, 70% of the things are things that were done somewhere else, if maybe more. And that's nobody's ashamed of that. It's like, you haven't seen it before, it's still a good idea, why not do it here? And 30% at most are novel things in most exhibitions. And a lot of those things that are the 70% are things that have their germ in the exploratorium, and I would say exploratorium slash Orselli school of sort of hands-on manipulables.
Well, and also I think, which is one thing that I like. I was just speaking with someone earlier today, and I often think about how much a sharing thing the museum business is.
Yeah.
That at least most of the people I gravitate towards are people, like if I called somebody up and asked them, they know that I would be happy to reciprocate, and so I think a lot of what informs my practice now, and the things I put online, like with my blog or the YouTube channel, is that notion of sharing information with people. Like it really, like I'm cognizant of the value of intellectual property, and I don't want to underplay that, but also I'm cognizant of the notion of like somebody holding on to this like one idea, like this is going to be the next hula hoop and it's going to make me millions of dollars.
Yeah.
I feel like I have new ideas every day, and so I want to share ideas and hear other people's ideas, and I think that's, to me, one of the best things about the museum business.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you the number of board meetings I've sat in, not to be too specific about it, where, the money making idea is, well, we just came up with this cool exhibit, let's monetize it. And, in the few times when we've actually tried that, it's, just not even come close to working. And it also, to me, violates the spirit, which, in fact, I may have picked up from you, of sharing as being, always beneficial, not because, the same thing shows up everywhere, but because the colleagues we have who are imaginative and creative need germs of ideas, and then they build out from those germs of ideas. I mean, I'm not sure how you feel about this, but I don't think I could ever, there are very few things I've done that I could truly claim to be original from whole cloth, They're all, I saw something, oh, that's cool, it triggers off an idea, so I think the cheap book and the cheap books are, exactly that. I think they're ways of, first of all, getting your hands dirty, making things, which I think is another value that you've always had. And if until you've broken something and fixed it, you sort of don't really know it.
That's why, having started my career working on the floor and building exhibits and being responsible for maintaining the exhibit, like I'm really loath to foist some pain in the neck exhibit on people because I think it's a cool idea. It's like, wait, let me just give you my auteur exhibition design here. It's like, come on, like for real. This is like, nobody is interested. Well, maybe somebody is interested in the Pantone color of laminate that you chose for this exhibit, but is that really what is important here?
Yeah, I think that's right. But at the same time, I think that I want to sort of go back and sort of lean on the idea of the cheap book being germs. It's like things that grow from it have really just been seen around the field. So it's not like you just pick them up and plant them in your place. It's a way of developing your own sense of creativity. I'm a musician, and I spend 80% of my time learning what other people do, And if I have 5 or 10% of my time that I'm doing something original, it's like, wow, man, that's kind of unusual. So
That's why you play the scales.
yeah, that's right. So
you got to
so,
keep your chops.
right. Or that's why you listen to other musicians, and that's why transcribe stuff. So I feel like it's kind of in that bed. So you know, if there's one message sort of get out to people who are listening to this, it's a really good investment, and I have no vested interest in that. At least getting your hands on one or two of these things, if you haven't made exhibits before, and seeing if you can sort of get your duct tape and your soldering iron together and put something together, because it's a real education. I certainly learned a lot from it. So
although it's interesting, just as a pivot now to being a consultant, and it like sort of what that means. I mean, I'm really interested in. So I mean, it's sort of funny. I want to help build up internal capacity in the organizations that I work with, and so a lot of times people are like, well, why do you want to do that? You're kind of putting yourself out of a job, and yes, to an extent, but I'm putting myself out of a job that I think consultants should be out of a job. Like it used to be, it seems to me that most museums had at least some basic internal capacity to do some even rudimentary level of physical prototyping and exhibit building in that. And now a lot of that's just been outsource everything. And it's like, oh, well, this is our business model. We want to outsource everything. And there's a big difference in things that you have to make and learn and like fix and break and stuff, than just like, oh, okay, the stuff just showed up and people installed it, and now if it breaks, like we don't even have the first sense of how we're going to fix it. That's
we have a service contract is really what it comes down to. I think I'm as we're talking, I realize all the things I probably either learned directly or indirectly from you, because when I was working at the Hall of Science, we didn't build our own exhibits. We did exactly what you're describing, and we had some real experience and I think creative curators, people who sort of put together the idea, people like Martin Weiss and others, and so I think it was a workable model. But we had this talented people in the shop who I think were a little demoralized, frankly, because they never heard about anything unless it was broken.
That's right.
And it was like that. Oh, this is broken. That's all they heard. So I don't know if you remember, we did this exhibit called Shadow Play, which was based a lot on what the Exploratorium, speaking of which, had done around the Tinkering Studio, and made it into a sort of a pop-up exhibit. And it was all built by the staff, and it was a great experience, and it was very popular. And it cost $40,000 for 5,000 square feet of exhibit. So you can't beat that with a stick. And so there's all these opportunities to look at the creativity inside the institution. Well,
and also that demoralization factor is a valid factor. I mean, if your only interaction with the public is sort of salvaging the wreckage of broken exhibits, you start to look at. I remember like talking with some explainers when I was working in Acton, Massachusetts, and they're like, "Well, why are we putting out these nice things? Like, I think we put out like people are just going to break them or steal them." And I was like, "Wait a second! If you design an exhibit as if everyone who's coming into it is a breaker and or a stealer, like you're designing a prison, you're not designing a museum exhibit. Down, like baby. It's like we want to, like, this is all going to be with gorilla cable, and it's going to like you couldn't kill this with a blowtorch. It's like, wow, like really? If if that means that occasionally things break because they're sort of loved to death, great.
Yeah,
You know, there's sort of a truism in museums,
yeah.
in museum exhibits, like it's the crappy exhibits that survive because nobody wants to really play with them or interact with them.
You only hurt the things you love.
That's right.
So, yeah, I mean, actually, and I think that segues or expands into a thought about, you know, how people are going to be making exhibits after the pandemic. You know, I mean, I think as I talk to colleagues, I think everybody feels that the kind of overhead that museums have accumulated of building big buildings, building, you know, $1 million exhibits, is not the model we're going back to, you know. And so
good. Good.
No, I know. And seriously, I mean, you wait around long enough, and your ideas become, you know. And I know you've always been an advocate for, you know, well, you've been
there is such a thing as a museum being too big. You know, in biology, they call it the carrying capacity of an ecosystem. You know, it gets too big, it just sort of collapses in on itself. Well, it's not maintainable.
When I was doing development, you know, and I was working as, you know, more or less an executive type gig, we call it feeding the beast. You know, we spend 80% of our time feeding the beast. You know, just keeping the building open, and you know, and so where is that in the mission that we're supposed to be keeping our building open? You know, it's kind of ancillary to the mission. So, you know, it's kind of an interesting challenge that I think.
Well, what I've been talking about, like I'm working with some groups that are talking about the future of science centers, whatever that means.
Oh, really? Well,
and the thing that's interesting to me is when I bring up the notion that a lot of what we could be doing or should be doing really is building independent or could be building independent. It is amazing. Like if you want to like divide a room into two groups, that's the way to do it, because there are people like, what are you talking about? And then there are people like, yeah, you know, we should. But
so
anyway, that's
whatever the solution is. Yeah. So let me ask you. So why do people hire you? What's wrong with them?
No, that's what my wife asks sometimes. She's like, you didn't really say that, did you? I was doing a consulting gig one time, and the director of a unnamed museum, like in the sort of break time, he just said, so, you know, if you had to name one thing that could immediately improve our museum, what would it be? And I couldn't help myself. I said dynamite. and he laughed because he thought I wasn't serious, even though I was serious. But you know, and then they continued to hire me because I suppose the two things I would say, three things actually. One is the aforementioned, like, I've actually worked in museums and worked on the floor of museums and had to realize the ways that exhibits and programs could go astray. That's one thing. The other thing is
yeah, but like I said, that's kind of a negative value. I think that, you know, how they can screw up. And, you know, in our experience when we've hired you, it wasn't because you were going to keep us from screwing up. You know, it was more like you were going to point us in a direction that, you know, we were receptive to.
Well, that's part two here, because I think the fact that I'm like, my background, my undergraduate degree is in science, and my master's degree is actually
you've got a master's in
science education. You know, it's actually with a teaching certificate attached to it. So it's an MAT. So you know, I'm not an industrial designer. I'm not I'm not trained that way. So my mindset is very much coming from what museums say they want to do, you know, education and the how people learn and things like that. So I mean, that's what really inspired me after I whizzed through the University of Michigan in 3 years, because I was so anxious to leave and get a real job, which is
spend enough time getting high in Ann Arbor.
I know. I like, if I had to pick one thing that I would do differently, it's like, why was I in such a rush? but I wanted to get my master's degree in education because I was like, well, I really want to understand better and think more about how people gather information and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I think that's another lens that I come at it. But the other thing, I guess the third thing I'd just say quickly is what I said previously. Like now, I'm really like almost all my projects have this aspect of how can through working with me, can I help create and build up this internal capacity after I leave, And so that is a little bit different than the sort of classic, consultant who borrows your watch to tell you what time it is. It's like, oh, well, thanks very much. That's it. So, but my kids have asked me, which is really interesting. Occasionally they will ask me, like out of sort of nowhere, a really astute business related question, like, well, how do you decide, Dad, who you're going to work with? And I mean, it's sort of also three things. It's like, are they nice? Are they smart? Is the project they're working on like something we can all like legitimately be interested in, like not some bogus kind of thing. And that, I mean, there are people who are independent museum professionals, people I like quite a bit, who their attitude is, hey, if there's a check attached, I'll work with anybody on anything. And I'm like, ooh, you're crazy. I want to work with people I actually like and people who are super smart, who are going to teach me things. And a project like at the end of it that sort of pushed the museum business or push this organization in a way they might not have gone otherwise.
Yeah,
So
I would be surprised that anybody, wouldn't articulate something. So I guess, if you're having beers with them, they'd say, yeah, if it pays, I'm there. But, in terms of how they try to present themselves to clients, potential clients, they have similar values, I suspect. But I think one of the differences I've noticed about you, and this sort of goes to this, I think you've called yourself chief instigator of.
Yeah, that's my title. People,
right.
For a while, every time I'd register for AAM, they'd change it, like they thought I misspelled it. So they investigator, and I was like, no. I know how to spell. It's instigator.
Right. So I mean, I think that if I were to differentiate the experiences we've had working and talking with you from the experiences we've had with people who come in and outside and advise, it's that you really kind of lay your claim down, like this is what I think is true, where I mean you sort of say, well, of course, but no, I mean that's the where's the check quality that some other people have, which is like, okay, here's this room of people, how can I get along with them to try to advance the cause of the museum? And a lot of times that's like not chief instigator, but it's chief like oil on troubled water person. It's like just trying to keep things sort of cool and moving in the same direction. And I can think of some very effective consultants. Well, you can say what you can disagree, but I think, well, I actually can't think of any very effective consultants, period. That's really
oh, well, there we are. Check out the website.
But I think of people who are very smart and capable people, let's put it that way, that their approach is, is more to try to build consensus around existing points of view. And so, I think, what did they say? What did Christ said, I bring the sword, not the, I mean, the idea is, lay down your claim and say your point. And,
well,
and
also the thing is, there are times, I often think of, I don't know why I always have this sort of thought, but I think, like, if I'm sitting on a hillside looking down at a railroad track and I see two trains at a distance coming towards each other on the same track, like, am I going to sit there and watch the crash like Gomez Adams with his train set? Or am I going to say, wait, start waving my red handkerchief and say, stop. So, I mean, it's fine if people disagree with me, but also I feel like if somebody hires me, I owe it to them to say something if I think something is askew, even if the person who just said it is the director or the big, you know, the silverback in the room.
Sure.
I'm like, I think this is going to be a problem, not because I don't like the color purple, but because this happened 2 or 3 times in different ways to me before in different situations, and it went really bad. So I don't want it to go really bad for you. Yeah. So can we think of a different way to do that? And sometimes people are receptive to that, and sometimes people are like, "Oh, this guy, we're done with him." And I'm like,
well, you know, I was thinking about this because I know you've been doing some international projects lately.
Yeah, sure.
You did a big project in Middle Europe, in Central Europe, right?
Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Museko.
Yeah, and with Lee and Joanne.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, totally. They just did. Actually, I'll just give them. I'll just give 2 Bulgaria-related plugs. One again for Skolnick Architecture and Design, because they were just involved with a great project in Plovdiv, which is the sort of second city of Bulgaria, with this beautiful basilica, Roman era mosaics and stuff. Wow. It will undoubtedly be a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's amazing.
Wow, good for them.
That just opened, and so yeah, we all have made good friends in Bulgaria. Who could tell?
Right, but so I think, you know, it's worth considering, particularly as we're trying to make museums more representative and more diverse. You know, talk about any set intuition that you have about how. Look, I'm here in California now. You know, the way we used to interact in New York doesn't actually work that well out here. You know, where I basically get up in somebody's face, or if I disagree or not. You know, I'm not as wedded to, you know, the idea of telling the truth as I think you are. But you know, but anything.
I've done a lot of work with the Exploratorium and other places. You know, the tech and that. So the thing is, I think you don't. You don't want to deliberately be a jackass, but I think people appreciate. The thing is, I think people appreciate if they know that they're going to get the straight story from you, and if they put something out there that you really, you know, you're not just going to say, "Well, I think it's a dumb idea, but I'm getting the check. I'm getting the check whether they do their dumb idea or not."
Like, I think it's actually, I think it's, again, the check part I'm sure is important. You know, it's critical for a lot of people, but I think it's also just this overwhelming sense, you know, for people who haven't been involved in this field for a long time, but in any field of groupthink. You know, it's this really, it's almost insuperable force inside of any decision making, you know, committee or whatever, however you describe it, that, you know, that everybody's trying to suss out what everybody else is thinking and trying to find a way to the end that's the least disruptive. And that is one of the most powerful and hardest to resist forces that I've ever, you know, encountered, which goes back to some extent, you know, why would somebody hire Paul? And part of it, I think, you know, when I think back on the times we've worked together, part of it is we kind of know that, you know, we kind of know, like, we need somebody in the room who's going to be, who's not going to be so susceptible. I mean, that's true of consultants in general, in theory at least, that they don't, you know, that they're not insiders, but who knows. But in the case of your stuff, when I think
depends on the consultant, I'd say.
Yeah, it really does, and what kind of work they're doing. You know, if they're strategic planners, then. But the, you know, I think that's part of the instigator brand. You know. You know, it's like, okay, well, this is going to be something where we unearth somebody.
My kids, when I tell my kids when they were younger, especially, you know, don't be instigators, because we have 4 kids, you know, and they're like, you're an instigator, and I get paid for it. So.
Your job description, right? Exactly.
Show me your business card. Show me your receipts.
So, you know, you once mentioned to me something. This is sort of tangential to this, but. Maybe because you put out the cheap books early on in your career, you once sort of said a little bit despairingly that you are always the one who gets caught, you know, called when they need to do inexpensively, right?
Yeah, I had somebody call me, and I just had to. I liked them, so I just politely said F you. You know, they basically called me and said, well, we'd like, you know, if we bought this from the Exploratorium, it would cost too much. So we're calling you to, and it's like, well, you know, that's a race to the bottom. No, I don't want to, like, I don't want to do that. Why don't you just, what I said to them, and I meant it in all sincerity, which is like the cheap books, you know, why don't you just build it yourself?
Right.
Like, why don't you find somebody, if you don't have that capacity inside your museum, you have that capacity in your community. Like,
Right.
why don't you like find somebody who will be an ongoing resource for you?
Right.
And the thing is, again, like, some people hear that and they're like, yeah, thanks, Paul. I just wanted you to make me Gravity Well or whatever, you know?
Right. I'm thinking about the Ithaca Science Center that I don't know if they still do that, but they had such a great relationship with Cornell,
Sure.
you know, and they built stuff.
Sure.
You know, basically they got the university graduate students and professors to build stuff for them.
When I was in charge of exhibits at the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum,
right.
Engineering classes, it was an assignment for them. They would have groups of engineering students, one of the top engineering schools in the country, right? To build prototypes for the museum. And, you know, we would go through the whole process and talk. It wasn't just like they came in, you know, like, okay, we're just going to make you a car brake exhibit. No, it's like, okay, let's talk about some ideas that you have and some needs that we have. And let's have you do that. And, you know, the university, they got credit. They learned something. The university paid for a lot of the materials, which, you know, everybody was happy. They got a real world. The thing is, and then we really tried, really tried to make sure that it wasn't just an academic exercise, that their thing ended up as an exhibit in the museum. Like, that this thing is, you did this thing and now this cool thing is in the museum, and, you know, there we are. So
I don't think you were around. I'm not sure if you were doing anything at the Hall of Science, but I was teaching at ITP for a couple of years.
Yes.
Which is the Interactive Telecommunications Program at NYU, which is a program that makes people, if you were going to try to identify, like, who would you want to have work in your museum, you know, like, a lot of those people were them. You know, they're people who have good media sense, they have good computer skills, they have good physical skills.
Well, they're makers, they're creative thinkers, they're problem solvers. They're interested in, you know, they're like, okay, what kind of tools can I use? Like, okay, I can use this Arduino thing and hook it up to a stalk of celery. And I'm like, let's do that.
Right. No, exactly. So we had a class that I taught with Nancy Heckinger, and the goal was to make a series of exhibits that we showed at the museum, and we had 2 or 3 days at the museum where the students were there being the explainers for each of their exhibits. And I have some pictures for that. I'd sort of forgotten about how cool it was, but they came up with some great ideas. Yeah. So I think that's actually like a real draw a line under that, you know, finding people in the community who want to help, because people do enjoy this stuff. And, you know, the right people do.
And it's just a mindset, you know. Again, it's this idea that there is a different mindset. If you think, well, anything we need, we can just find somebody, some company, some place online to just buy this from and ship it in, you know, like the Sears Roebuck model of exhibit development, or the Amazon model of exhibit development, as opposed to, okay, we don't have enough money to hire Paul. We don't have enough money to buy this beautifully crafted exhibit device from XYZ museum. But we do have ideas, and we do have people who are resources in our community. And we underestimate how excited people are to work with museums and see their stuff end up in museums like that. Like, people are so excited to do that, which is wonderful, you know. And
there's a lot of these as another sort of, if you're out there and listening to this and you're working in museums out throughout the country and the world, is there are an increasing number of these university programs that are devoted to things like gaming and devoted to things like physical computing and maker style stuff, and offering them a space to show something is a good way to have sort of rotating things that may not be as robust as you need them to be to last for 5 years, but they're things that you wouldn't have thought of. And so that was another thing we did. I remember we had this space at NISI that we had a bunch of different people put stuff into, and so I think there's a way to capitalize on that because people are super eager to have changing stuff inside.
Well, and if you, the organization, set the parameters
right.
in the right way. I mean, I always think of, which is, I love, the notion from the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, the Jane Werner and the folks who work there, tough art. They commission art exhibits, things that are going to be in the museum. But they're letting you know right up front, this stuff is going to get pounded on. This stuff, people are going to use it in ways that you don't expect. And so it needs to be tough art. Yeah. And there's a prototyping process built into it. And it's like, we're not just letting you plunk this thing on the floor and walk away. You got to stick around and make sure that everything works out. I think that's the honest way to do it. I mean, if you I do a lot of work with prototyping and go work with museums and even museum companies, and this idea that, well, we don't have time or money to do prototyping. I like it comes out of my mouth immediately. It's like, if you don't have the time and money now on the front end to do prototyping, I guarantee you're going to have a hard time having the time and money to fix your mistakes. Like you're just going to be saddled with these things, that limp along, or you just kind of want to shove into a corner, or you're forced to take off the floor,
Well, there's two kinds of prototyping. I actually wanted to dig into this because I know you've been probably a principal advocate for prototyping, for physical prototyping in particular, but all kinds. And I wanted to tease out this distinction, if you see one, between making sure things work, physically work, right? So, with dial to turn, people can figure it out, to making sure that they convey the content, or they convey the whatever unit of engagement.
Yeah, the ideas. Well, I think those are the two things, and this is where physical prototyping intersects with evaluation and visitor testing, however you want to frame it. They're all sort of variations on the spectrum as far as I'm concerned. But the thing is, there's sometimes, oftentimes when I'm speaking with graduate students or teaching, working with people, I say, and I mean it, is like, sometimes the easiest way to fix an exhibit is to change the label, because there is just a sort of functionality and a directionality kind of thing. But also, if you get into this mindset, an intuitive nature of exhibits. So like, if you make the affordances and you design it the right way, like it's almost independent of the label. Like somebody could productively approach and start fiddling around with this thing and start to get the idea of what it's about, without having to read like, oh, okay, here are these 6 directions you need to follow in the sequence, which is just always a bad way to do things.
No, it's not ideal. No.
So, but I think, those two things, there's the functionality part of it. And then there is, okay, what do I want people to take away from this? And I think that's the part that sort of gets a little lost in the sauce, because you'll come across exhibits or exhibition areas, and people say, oh, look at the kids, they're running around and laughing, they're having such a good time, this is a successful exhibit.
Right.
That's such a low bar. I mean, if I threw a bunch of bubble wrap and empty cardboard boxes into the middle of the room, I bet people would have a great time with it, but I don't know that that's like setting my aspirations that high. But when you set out and say, well, we really want people to understand how quantum mechanics works or whatever, like that evolution, that there's a relationship, blah, 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 blah. And then, well, did people get that? Did people talk to you about that? And if they didn't, what are you going to change? Like, if that's really what you want people to walk away with, and I think that's the part that gets lost.
Well, this is a good moment to just ask you for like one or two crystal ball things after after we come out of the pandemic. What if you were going to sort of say, here's how I think museums are going to be different in say 3 years or 5 years, something like that. So the near term future. Give me sort of two things that you think that you hope will be different. I guess.
I think the thing that gives me both optimism and solace, if you like, are the people who are working to craft what indeed will be a new normal. I mean, we lucky us, we get to live, we laughed at our grandparents or people who lived through the Depression or a World War or something. Like, now we got to live through, we are continuing to live through one of those things. And aside from boring our future grandchildren with all the horror, the horror stories, oh, when I was this is what happened when it was COVID. What are the organizations, who are the people that can actually help chart the new paths? That's like tremendously interesting to me. The places that are just resigned to being gigantic tourist destinations. they're still gonna do that. They're like, they can say whatever they want, but the talk is cheap. Let's see what you actually do. Yeah. So
I think the thing that makes me optimistic is that there's a generation of people who who are conspicuously younger than us and have a conspicuously different set of experiences, who are more diverse, even if it's just across gender, but they are more diverse, and they do bring a different perspective. I think I've enjoyed as a boomer my time on the stage and sort of being the focus of all the attention. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next generation brings. I'd like to be part of it. Still, I'm not walking off the stage, but I do think it involves us, people like us, as you're saying, listening. Which so I guess go ahead.
I was just going to say. I mean, honestly, I want to be conscious of not only sharing the mic, but stepping off the stage, because that's how the museum business is going to grow. In my opinion, there are I'm just winning hearts and minds on this video. I think there are a lot of people who should have stepped off the stage a long time ago, and given that the pathway and the limited number of positions for museums, even if the motivation is pure, if there aren't the spaces, how are these people going to actually be able to grow and prosper and help foster a new museum world if some of the old timers, including myself, don't, at bare minimum, share the mic more and more realistically step off the stage sooner? I mean, honestly.
I think in your case, though, and I'd like to think in my case, we have we have a dialogue function that we can serve. We listen to people who are younger than us. We respond in ways based on our experience, and there's a good dialogue that evolves. So I think that's what I'm hoping for, and I know you have a huge amount to contribute. So don't walk off the stage yet.
Yeah, but we're gonna walk off the digital stage here, and I'll say thank you for turning the tables in such a generous way. I really appreciate